Hello,
Okay.
everybody.
Hello, hello, hello.
Hmm. Going to do this entire thing in a fake English accent.
Yes, very jolly good.
I was just
I'm
saying
sorry.
yesterday when I did a presentation in the UK virtually that I was there for 9 months and never picked up a shred of the accent. Although what I didn't say was I was in the Yorkshire area and I would not have wanted to pick up that particular accent, not to be accentist, but it's not the posh accent that
That's classist, honey. That's classist.
it's not the posh accent that I would have wanted to bring home.
That
It's
would have been
not easy to
interesting.
pick it up. I don't know. Madonna picked it up real easy. I don't know why when the rest
That's
of us
because
go.
she's a chameleon. She that's her thing. This constant reinvention. It's worked for her for 40 years or something. It really is sort of amazing.
Okay, there's Carl Anthony Pierre, who wanna so is it Leon? Is that how you pronounce your name? Yeah,
Sorry, like Layowyn, Leon.
Leon. So I said it right.
Yes, like Sierra Leone. Yes.
Great. So our two workshop authors are here for the second portion of today, which is the
Oh,
workshop.
great. Need to
Yes.
put
I did
those
send
up
reminder emails to make
on
sure
my
they were
screen.
there.
Great.
There we go.
Great, great, great.
See that right
Okay,
there.
good. Leon and body of work. There we go. Last zombie story and body of work. So, sweetheart, let's get
Yes,
going. We
let's do
warm up
it.
into this to give people a little bit more time. Uh, but welcome to the Life Writing Professional workshop. This is about talking about the path of action that can lead you to a professional career. That means making anybody can sell stories. I think that the average person following a decent strategy can sell stories. Can you make enough money on it to pay a significant proportion of your bills? That's when you start edging into professional territory. I think that that's more strategy than talent. I honestly do. And I think
And
that,
also,
yeah, go ahead, sweetheart.
just a quick shout out, selling a story is professional too, I mean, I went through a long period where I didn't want to write full time because I'd done it for 15 years and there was a lot of up and down. But you're selling stories, you're a pro.
Yeah, I think that coming up with a definition that is useful, that is empowering, is one of the things that makes success possible. That if you set your standards so impossibly high that you're not going to be happy until you do something that a fraction of a 1% of the population can ever do, and it's going to take you 40 years to do it, you're going to have a miserable life.
Oh shoot, the music started playing. I
It
didn't mean to do
did.
that.
Woo!
All right,
This,
that's our what's
hey,
going on music. Let me turn that
this is
off
this
real
is
quick.
writing church.
Welcome to
Really.
Writing Church. Woo!
We want
Okay,
you
hold on.
to worship at the altar of your creativity. That there is within you all of the creative oomph that you've ever sought. And we're just going to keep working with you to get you the technical skills, the emotional skills, and even the physical energy skills to accomplish the dream that you want. And that's our commitment. So, Tanara, you said that you had a very specific agenda that you wanted to go through. So, we can start with you, and I'll just follow along.
Well, we had discussed this. I don't know how in depth I will get. Look at the kitties, they're so cute. Um, because as a matter of fact, I recorded this entire presentation and I'm going to put it up on the Life Writing Professional site on Circle. Because yesterday I made a presentation to some version of Cambridge, uh, their writing program at Cambridge about the reformatory specifically. And because that's not something I've advertised to you, not everyone here has read the reformatory. And I think the most perhaps useful approach would be for me to talk about the balance between your creative energy, which is the writing and the flow state, and research. I don't know how many of you do a lot of research for your work, but it's a skill to learn how to balance it. So I thought I would talk a little bit about where the reformatory came from, which is why it was so long and difficult to write. And I have some photos and I have a whole thing because I just did it for Cambridge. So why not do it for y'all? Just one second, let me pull it up. Screens, there it is, and share and slideshow. So I'm not going to go through the whole journey of the reformatory because it was a 10-year journey, but I do want to hit the highlights. I don't know how many of you have read my novel, this book, and this is not a flex, but yeah, it is. Okay, so I was doing an Instagram live. I was doing an
Stop
Instagram
the
live.
lying. Tell the truth.
I was doing an Instagram live last year, and in the midst of that Instagram live, someone wrote in the comments, Stephen King is tweeting about your book right now. So of course I toggled over to another screen while I was on my Instagram live to see what they were talking about. Of course, my publisher had asked for a blurb, but we didn't get one. We got one from Joe Hill, his son, but we did not get one from the King. And that was fine. You know, he blurbed My Soul to Keep back in 1997, so I wasn't trying to be greedy about it. But as you can see, this is now on the cover. That's how it works now. A tweet becomes a blurb and they put it on the paperback cover. And then he also went on to talk about it at PBS, which, I mean, he's just been talking about it. So this book has won more awards than anything I've ever written. It has really struck a nerve. I just got an email this morning from a former student who said his girlfriend is at Duke Law School and that there's someone there, they were using it in a critical race theory class at Duke Law. I'm like, wow, just so grateful for the response. It makes all the work worthwhile. Some of you may have heard me talking about my late mother, Patricia Stevens Dew. She's on the book cover behind me, if you're seeing my little thumbnail. We wrote a memoir together called Freedom in the Family, a mother-daughter memoir of the fight for civil rights, which at the time I thought was the most difficult book I would ever write. Just because, again, as you can see just from these photographs, the history of the civil rights movement was so frightening and so violent and left so many emotional and physical scars. Like my mother's dark glasses are not a fashion statement. She was sensitive to light from the time she was 20 years old after being tear gassed in a nonviolent protest. So this is just, I mean, sadly, I will say that the policing today is much more militarized than it was in the 1960s. This looks almost quaint when you compare it to contemporary protest photos with police in riot gear and weapons of war. But nonetheless, in the 1960s, left a great deal of scars. And she was the first lover of horror in my life. I noticed that our both of our stories today are various versions of horror stories. One is more of a superhero horror, and one is more of a tongue-in-cheek zombie horror. But my mother loved horror, and I think she loved horror because of her trauma, not just during the civil rights era, but leading up to it, like the reason she was willing to put her life on the line to try to change laws that she might not live to enjoy, as far as she knew, which is a form of Afrofuturism. You know, all activism is futurism, because we don't expect necessarily to see those changes overnight, right? So this is the root of my love for horror. It's the root of my mother's love for horror. And this is the Dozier School for Boys. It didn't always look like this. It closed down in 2011. And when I first started researching the reformatory, my dad and I made several trips because it was about 90 minutes from his house in Quincy, Florida. So we made several research trips to Mariana, sometimes just to vibe with the place. Sometimes we would just take pictures. But there was a hurricane one of the years. Please mute everyone. Or maybe Steve, you can mute everyone. Okay, so I unmuted myself now. There was a hurricane that did a lot of damage to the buildings, and that to me was more indicative of what this place was really like. Because one of the insidious things about the Dozier School for Boys is it was pretty. You know, these were brick dormitories. There was a white chapel rolling. It's like a beautiful grounds. They're marching in the Christmas parade. They're growing corn for the county. Of course, the underside of that is that the children were picking this corn as forced labor. So it was kind of a forced enslavement situation. Um, Printing press for the whole town. So the reason the Dozier School for Boys stayed open for more than 100 years, even though it was fraught with complaints literally from almost day one. And just for context, some of the children were sent there for no more offense than being an orphan from the ages of 5 till 21. They could keep you till 21. Don't be a football star. One memoir, he talked about how his stay was extended because he was such a good football player. It was a segregated facility, white on one side, black on the other side, and all of the boys suffered horrors. Although the majority of the dead bodies that showed up on the grounds were of the black children. And this is me and my dad there on one of our research trips. Those crosses you see were not erected by the school, by the way. These children were buried by other children in unmarked graves. And the parents often would just receive a letter saying, by the way, your child is dead. So there was no closure. And this was where my great uncle, Robert Stevens, was buried, here at what was called Boot Hill. Again, it had its own cemetery. So you really don't need to know more than that. Why were boys dying? They were dying while trying to run away. There are reports that guards would just shoot them while they were running, which, I thought was just an anecdote until I watched The Nickel Boys, which was Colson Whitehead's fictionalized story. And that's exactly what happens to some of the characters in that story. They're running and people just shoot at them. These are children, by the way, juveniles. Or they die from exposure or perhaps from a whipping or punishment. I'm not going to go into the horrific stories that were in the memoirs that I had to read to research this book. I'm not going to, there are some things that you just can't get out of your head that you don't need in your head. But just know it was a tough, tough research process. And here I am all bright-eyed with my dad in 2013 thinking, hey, I'm going to write about this place. I didn't know it'd be 10 years before the book would come out. And my father, who has dementia, was very much diminished, unfortunately, by the time the book came out, to the point where I'm not sure he could actually read it, although he was pivotal and very informative when I was writing the book, because one of the scenes takes place in a judge's chamber in 1950. And I was like, Dad, you were a civil rights lawyer in the 60s. What do you say if you get a meeting with a judge that's going to change his mind when you're in the middle of the Jim Crow South? So he gave me a lot of great tips. And for those of you who do research that is more written research, don't forget the interview. I'm a former journalist, so the interview is an important part of my research process as well. And in this case, I was able to interview my own dad. What tactics would you have used if you were talking to this judge? And he talked about trying to take attention away from skin color, trying to create rapport with humor, which is a tactic Thurgood Marshall also used. And also bear in mind, he told me, these judges don't feel like they're racist. They want to be seen as the good guy. So you kind of play on that part of their ego. You're different. You're not like the rest. Yeah, Gracetown isn't like this other city, all this kind of stuff. So a lot of that ended up in the book. Very grateful for that research portion. That's the whole family. Steve, Jason, when he was much younger, he was 9 when we all went. And I think this trip made a big impression on Jason, actually. He actually did pick up, I should change the slides to talk about Jason. Wait, hold on. You know what? Let me go back to this real quickly. If you've read The Reformatory, and I'm not going to give anything else away, this is a real life photo from The Reformatory. In my mind, it was going to be the book cover. I fashioned a lot of what I wrote from photographs. Photographs are an incredible treasure trove of research if you're writing about real events, like real history. It doesn't help so much with, science fiction that's futuristic, and it doesn't help as much, with some fantasy, obviously. But for anything with a historical basis, photographs are so useful. This is a photograph of a burial at Boot Hill. So same place where I was in the other picture, but generations earlier, where these young men literally had to bury their own. One memoir, a man who happened to be white, talked about how he had to help bury his brother at Boot Hill. So this is I mean, just imagine what a treacherous place this is. And that little boy in the center, if you read the reformatory, he was my model for the character named Blue. That's how I pictured Blue. And the adult in the picture who's standing not far from Blue is my model for Mr. Crutcher, who's one of the dorm masters. And that's all I'll say because I don't want to give anything away. But research included going to meetings. My dad's all about a meeting. So that's my dad at the very first meeting on the right, and there's Steve with a subsequent trip that we made when the University of South Florida started actually exhuming remains and looking for artifacts. But at that first meeting, it was just survivors telling their stories, and that's when I knew I had to write about it. I knew I had to write about it when I heard the same stories coming from Black and white survivors who didn't even know each other, who hadn't even met, but had suffered similar abuse at the hands of these sadistic a-holes who were running this place. Nobody's gone to jail. The state of Florida last year, much to my shock, Governor DeSantis actually approved funds for reparations for survivors. So you know how treacherous this had to be if a very red governor in that very red state signed legislation to give up money with anything having to do with reparations for anybody. And this is Jason sifting through materials while we were there. These were some of the bunks left inside the buildings. And this is the children on their way to do farm work. So like I said, photographs were a huge part of my research. And my real dilemma when I decided I wanted to write the story was, how do I tell it? You know, I did flirt for a moment with the idea of a memoir, but I'm going to be perfectly honest. The background of the reformatory is that my great uncle died there at the age of 15 in 1937. And I didn't see how I was going to spend the time to research that leading to that ending. That didn't seem like the kind of North Star that would motivate me to get through a difficult process of writing a book. So I pretty much tabled the idea of nonfiction pretty early. And when I gave myself permission to write it as fiction, that's where the Afrofuturism and speculation came in, because I decided it needed to be a ghost story. And the ghosts would help keep me honest because, for example, if I don't have the ghosts, but I don't want to write about children being beaten, sexually assaulted, and murdered, page after page after page, what I would have ended up with was a very sanitized version of what the Dozier School for Boys was, sanitized enough for me to want to write the story, but that would have been dishonest. And just because it's fiction doesn't mean it can't be honest. The honesty is that this place had pervasive violence against children. So ghosts became my answer. Ghosts became my solution. And then I could do a little hat trick where both Robert, who's 12 in my story, and my story takes place in 1950 because I knew that era better, frankly. Robert is afraid of the reformatory because he's heard it's haunted. So I could use that and the reader's fear of the ghosts to sort of do a bait and switch, because it turns out, yes, there are ghosts. And yes, Robert can see the ghosts and communicate with the ghosts. And yeah, they're not always fun to be around. There's a scene in the chapel, if you've read it, that I think is particularly scary that has to do with the ghosts. But the real monsters in this story are not the ghosts. The real monsters are the warden, the institution itself, and more broadly, the systemic racism of Jim Crow. So I decided to tell a story with child protagonists, one 12 who's inside the reformatory, one, his sister 17, who's outside trying to work the system to free him, which is why this law professor, that aspect of the story is why I think a law professor would be interested, because it is kind of a journey through critical race theory, which examines the intersection between race, power, and law. Right. And that's exactly what, like, this book is literally critical race theory with a cover. I mean, it's the whole story is critical race theory because it's about a child who falls into the system and the racism that sent him there. And I have a couple of other things up here in terms of the short story. I was stalling out. I'd been working on it for 3 or 4 years, maybe longer, and decided to take my own advice that I give writing students all the time, and which I will pass on to you, which is if you're writing a longer work in progress and it's going to take you time, and it just always does. A novel can take 2, 3, 5 years to write, even if you're an experienced writer. If you're inexperienced and you're actually learning how to write by writing novels, it can take even longer, to the degree that some writers fall away from their desire to even be writers because it's so difficult to work through a novel. So I tell my writers, write a short story in the world of your work in progress. Write a short story in the world of your novel, which is what I did in 20, I think 18, 5 years finally later. I published a short story called The Reformatory in the Boston Review. And it was literally a chapter from my book, but just arced, it had a built-in arc. It's very effective in novels. Obviously, I think I talked about scene construction last time, right? So if you have an objective and an outcome within a scene, then you have an arc built in. Theoretically, almost any chapter in any book could be a standalone, theoretically. But in this case, it was a scene with Robert finally being sent to what's called the Fun House in my novel, but what's called the White House in the White House in real life, which is the whipping shed. And let me tell you something, even years after I had finished the research and the book had already been out for a while before this memorial went up in Florida and people started sending me pictures, this memorial triggered me. In fact, I didn't even include the pictures that were the most triggering in this presentation. There's a bed off on the side. They used to strap them down and beat them. They have bloody handprints. I mean, Florida went in on taking responsibility for what happened at the Dozier School. I don't know exactly why, but I would like to think that it's not just because white children were affected as well as Black children, although I'm sure that's a big part of it. But I think it's also perhaps that with a modern sensibility, such heinous behavior against children is something that crosses political lines. I would love to think that. I mean, it seems like that should be the world we're living in. And so they put up this memorial and they've set aside funds for survivors. And Steve and I worked for a while on a TV pitch that ended up not going anywhere, which is what happens with most TV pitches. But every step of the way, I kept my dad in the loop because, it was taking so long for me to write the book. And then when COVID happened and all these delays, my book was delayed by about a year as well. Once it was sold, I was really worried my father wasn't going to live to see the publication of this book. So at every stage, like when I had a finished manuscript, I printed up the whole manuscript at Kinko's, which is not cheap, and put the cover on it and a picture of us on the back so I could present it to him in that form. This is the advanced reader's copy. I presented it to him in this form. So he would know it's coming, Dad. This book is actually finished, and you had a role in helping to bring it to life. This is the Boston Review story. And then it was option. I'm not going to go too far into that. I'm not going to go into the adaptation stuff, but what I will talk about why the reformatory resonates, I think, with our current times. I mean, I look at the sales figures, which are, again, it's performed better than anything I've ever written. I don't have a context for the way this book is performing in my past career. And I thought my past career was going pretty well, but this is a whole different thing. And I think it's one of those things where it's an interaction with our times. And I don't know if the student is here who talked to, or maybe it wasn't even in this meeting. It might've been in the Fire Dance Live, where a playwright was concerned about the political times that we're facing and how their work would be perceived, and feeling fearful about putting themselves out there when we're in these political times. Now, I didn't know when I was working on the reformatory that we were going to be in these political times. But I do have a feeling that is actually partially in reaction to the times that we're in, that the reformatory is performing so well. It's because of the historical depiction of Jim Crow and segregation for generations of people who really just don't understand. I mean, in our minds, we're like, okay, so there were white only and colored only signs. No, it's not just that. It means if a white person is walking toward you on the sidewalk, you move out of the way. You keep your eyes down. You have to drive under the speed limit, hoping you won't get pulled over, which is something that we're still dealing with today, by the way. Um, I mean, if you're a white ally, your behavior is also policed. Your behavior is also you're going to be put in fearful situations if you ally yourself with Black people. If you're queer during Jim Crow, you're not telling anybody about that. If you're Jewish during Jim Crow, you're apt to run into anti-Semitism in a very open way. Even people looking at your curly hair, wondering if you're part Black or all that kind of stuff. It's a terrible era that we are still seeing vestiges of and almost a romanticization of, which is really frightening today. But yeah, there are a lot of issues in this book that even though it's set in 1950, really resonate with readers today. And whether you're writing historical or not, let's say you're writing futurism. I'll take off the share now. Let's say you're writing futurism, like a lot of people are in Afrofuturism. How can you parallel what's happening today with what is happening in your future? I mean, this is very much what Octavia Butler's work was about. Was it not? I mean, that's why people basically think that she was a psychic when she wrote Parable of the Sower, because she was looking at the today of when she was writing it and the trajectory of where this behavior is going to lead, like if this goes on, as Steve says, and one of the highline principles of science fiction. So if this goes on, we're going to be living in not just gated communities, but walled off communities, guarded communities. We're going to have to, not only will the police only prioritize you according to your income, you will have to pay for the police to come to you, which isn't that different from being prioritized by neighborhood, right? So we live in a very nice neighborhood. There was a situation last year where people were knocking on our door in the middle of the night and being a nuisance, and we didn't know what steps to take. And I was very hesitant to call the police because that's not my first thought when there's an issue for reasons. Steve wanted to call the police. We called the police, and they're like, "Oh, well, if you like, we'll just have someone drive by a couple times at night and make sure there's nothing going." I'm like, "What?" That's a thing. That's not a thing in every neighborhood. Okay. That is not a thing in every neighborhood. That depends on where you live. So if you're writing futurism that you want to have extra impact, or historicals that, because they're two sides of the same coin. My philosophy of this is human beings are what we are. We are what we are, whether we're in the past, the present, the future, in a fantasy novel. Like, we are the elements of our humanity make us very consistent. It's actually one of the things that makes it not so difficult to write science fiction, because once you've figured out, like, what are my different technologies, what's my setting, like, you get that stuff, the world building, right? But the psychology piece, that's the same. People are this. I mean, there may be, of course, there are going to be social trends that are different, and I'm sure as we look at gender today, attitudes toward gender could be very, very different in a far future story. But people are just people. We're petty, we're loving, we're tribal, we're communal, we're hateful, we're insecure. We think the way we grew up is the way everybody should grow up. It's just, I mean, all that stuff is going to be the same. Um, so yeah, that is a reformatory, and I'm going to go ahead and put my full speech to the writing students at Cambridge in the Circle space. Hopefully, I tried to tape it. I'll see if it worked, and you all can watch it at your leisure. It may even be transcribed. Actually, I'm using a program called Fathom, which is associated with Zoom, and I don't use it that often, but I did use it yesterday, so I will figure out what I have and put that up as soon as possible. But does anybody have any questions for me specifically about the reformatory or anything I've said so far?
Yeah, raise your hands if you have a question of any kind. If
Or
not, or
not
while we're
necessarily.
I
while
will.
we're waiting for that,
Hello.
Oh,
oh,
okay. Leon has one.
Leon.
Hi. So when you were putting the story together, did you kind of like build the world in the background of it? Like what steps did you take to how you were going to start it and how you were going to end it? Like,
Oh, that's a great question. Those are the only two things I knew, how I was going to start it and how I was going to end it. The book opens very early with the arrest of Robert. You know, it's literally the morning of his so-called infraction, which is a schoolyard kind of scuffle. That's the beginning. And I knew I was writing to an end with a pickup truck driven by an old lady. That was the image in my mind, like to get me through the end of this novel. And I ended up changing that because my editor wanted me to write a different ending and add another chapter. But for me, all I needed was that pickup truck driving away, and everything else was filling in the blanks, the world building, which is the same in a historical, frankly, as in futurism or fantasy, except that with historical, we do have the benefit of interviews with people who lived through it. We have photographs, we have the research. So I chose the era my mom was always talking about, which was her childhood in the 1950s. I could see that more clearly. Even though Robert Stevens died in 1937, and you might say, well, why not based it in the 1930s? I didn't know the 1930s, and frankly, I didn't want to spend that extra time trying to learn the 1930s. It's not that different. It's not that, don't get me wrong. I mean, a small southern town in Florida is not going to look hugely different between 1930 and 1950, except the automobiles, some of the technologies, you know. So I tried to introduce as a part of the world building. And one of the things that makes it forward facing in Afrofuturism to me is very similar to what Julie Dash did in Daughters of the Dust. Okay, that movie. Daughters of the Dust is a historical, but it's considered Afrofuturism. Why? Because it's magical realism. The narrator is an unborn child. So, right then, we're not in reality anymore. But to me, more importantly, it's a forward facing film. If you've seen Daughters of the Dust, it's all about leaving your ancestral home on the islands and moving to the mainland and the mysterious future that awaits you there. And on top of that, which is the whole thematic of the movie, there's a fascination with the technology of the day, the kaleidoscope. Because, you know, these kids on the island, they've never seen a kaleidoscope. So they see the pretty pictures on the kaleidoscope. There's a whole lot made about the photographer who sets up a group photo to document the moment. So there's this fascination with the camera equipment. Now, all that equipment and technology is old to us, but it's new to those characters. And technology is also one of the themes in Daughters of the Dust, which to me is what makes it Afrofuturism, even though it's a historical, if that makes any sense. So I was thinking about that, like, how can I have a similar fascination with technology that's new to them? Like her employer is one of the few people on the block that has like an electric washing machine. Television sets are just starting to show up. So one of the characters has a TV, but when she turns it on, all she can see is snow because there's no station nearby. Like she's right at the cusp of the television era, but not quite embraced by it yet. And also hinting at the burgeoning civil rights movement. There was no concerted national civil rights movement when my story is set, but there were activists. Harry T. Moore is a character. And it's sort of looking forward to it. Like she gets a glimpse of what a freedom song would sound like. So it's forward looking in the same way that Daughters of the Dash was forward looking. And the rest of the world building was family anecdotes and, you know, what I know about small towns and cross the railroad tracks, you're in the Negro town and it's not going to be as well maintained and, you know, and all that other stuff that I learned from my parents and from reading and et cetera. And I see there are other hands up. So even though I have wandered far afield of your question, I hope I answered it. And I'm going to see if
Thank you.
anybody else wants to. Jaime,
We
good to
go.
see you.
There we go. Hi, everybody. Yeah, I'm been thinking about your stories about how long it took you to write the reformatory, and I've got project I've been working on for about 15 years, telling some stories about the LGBTQ experience in America with that freedom fight and
Hmm.
um, various difficult memories. Some of it is informed by my own experience, some of it is informed by other people's experiences. And I'm wondering, what were the things that you did to get over those emotional humps while
Listen,
you.
I'm going to give you a twofer because someone in the chat was also asking about how balance the research to avoid the writing and all that. And all of it was pain. You know, I convinced myself it was because I was busy. I mean, legitimately, I got my first TV credits while I was working on this. And I met Jordan Peele and like we were doing like a million things. So I always felt justified in my procrastination.
T, I want to make a comment. It is once you get down this path, it is fascinating how your mind will create wonderful opportunities to distract you from the work
Yes.
you need to
But Steve
do.
was always telling me, you know, and I think this is an emotional version. It's like, no, it's not. That's not emotional. But it totally was emotional because I would like feel like I was kicked in the stomach reading these memoirs. And it was a similar feeling to my mom, which was real life experiences and interviews. And I'm interviewing people too. So what did I do? First of all, I had a morning ritual. It was during this time that I got more deeply into having early morning walks, you know, and I mean really early because Jason was in like middle school, elementary school, so I would walk 6:30, 7 in the morning in my neighborhood, trying to get into meditation. I wasn't as good about the meditation then as I am now, but I was just starting to explore meditation. And probably my other one was music, I would say, leaning into playing the piano and keyboard.
Ah,
Which I used to have it
folks.
right here in my office, you know, always for years I've had a piano and keyboard in my office. It's the first time I have it in a while. So those kinds of things, Jaime, just
Okay.
to try to take care of myself, but yet it was difficult to sort of lurch from this horrific research into what's supposed to be my happy place, which is writing. And I think the reformatory was like the first time in fiction where writing did not feel like my happy place. Like some of you who might have seen Octavia Butler's papers or notes from her papers, it doesn't sound like she had fun often when she was writing. I know it had to offer her relief in some way. It was something that she felt compelled to do. And in that way, it was a kind of a comfort. But when you look at the papers about Octavia's process, it just doesn't sound like she was having a good time when she sat. Like me, like book I'm writing now, man, I can't wait to jump into it later today. Cannot wait. But I never felt that way about her it was like, okay, now I have to do the scene where this happens now. Okay, I gotta and to do it in a way that would extract enough of the poison out for the reader so that it wasn't as difficult. I mean, if it was as difficult for people to read as it was for me to write, it would not be selling as well as it is. Now, granted, all these people are saying I had to put it down, I had to walk away, it was tough. I get it, but you didn't have to walk away for 10 years like I did. Like you did you walked away for a day and you came back to it. I was walking away for weeks, you know. So I managed to take out enough of the poison so that it was quote entertaining. And Jaime, I don't know if your project lends itself to being entertaining, but one of the things the lens of speculation does is it gives you a little bit of an emotional cushion, right? So that it can
Right.
be more entertaining.
Well, and what I find, I have some serious science fiction projects, but they're not specifically related to the LGBTQ stuff. And then I have the sort of historical things. And I got asked to do a presentation at a youth conference next Saturday. So I'm going to have to miss things that are happening on Saturday next week because I'm going to be doing a historical presentation. And much of the events I'll be talking about are the events that I'm covering in the fiction book. And
Uh,
so I have to figure out a way to tell the truth in an entertaining fashion to these young people. And I know I can use that in the book, but
yeah,
it's I'm finding I'm excited to give the presentation, but oh, to do the prep to get ready for it is
So
like,
hard.
oh man,
And also, maybe it might
Look,
help you.
Jaime,
Oh
yeah,
yeah, go on, Steve.
one thought is that you've got to develop your skills. You have to develop your understanding of marketing. You
hmm
have to have fun, and you have to give service.
right,
So I think that it was not a bad when we talk about working on short stories, and you could write a short story every week. If it's you could write aim at doing 3-page short stories. Aim at making
right,
doing little gems, and there's no reason whatsoever not to alternate. This one's going to be serious. This one's going to be for business. This is going to be
right,
this, and in that way, you're not getting stuck down any one emotional tunnel. Okay,
right.
because you remember that the individual stories do not matter. I don't really care. What I do care about is the integrity of your process. You have to set up systems that will get you there. And the individual works are going to be byproducts of having operated in a particular way. So it's like you're writing a story, sure, but what you're really doing is immersing yourself in the flow of being a writer. And what do
Oh,
writers do? Writers write. This is who
right.
you are. See, it's not discipline. I don't have discipline. I have hunger to be who I am. And who am I?
Okay.
One aspect of that is I'm a writer. So you're nurturing a little baby writer inside yourself. And that writer has to ground himself in things that are actually important to him. Okay, that you're escaping suffering, so you're going to deal with the stuff that made you who you are. Even some of it's painful, some of it's wonderful. If you're going to write about the first time you barely avoided a gay bashing, be sure to write about the first time you fell in love. See what
Yeah,
I'm
Yeah.
saying?
that's another
Don't
thing I was going to say. I mean,
go
not to
for it.
interrupt you, although I just did,
No,
but
please.
for me, it was so important to have that hope at the end of the tunnel, right?
Right.
So if you can arc your presentation to a place of hope, I mean, it's difficult now at a time when a lot of these hard fought rights are under literal attack, but also this is cyclical. I mean, it's a little depressing to think like how long the cycles take, because remember, Obama came into office in 2008 and we are still backlashing in 2025. Okay. So the cycles are long, but they are cycles. And
Right.
you can arc your presentation, you can arc your anecdotes, no matter what you take people through, you can arc it to something hopeful.
Well, I just had a light bulb go on too, because I remember the first time I encountered the sentence a day idea and how helpful and useful that was at making progress on the many different works I've got in progress. And the light bulb that just went on is I've been overwhelmed by the totality of all the stories together, but I can do one vignette at a time.
That's
Yes,
right. And here's the whole
And
thing,
oh,
Heidi.
yeah, that's how I get through today until next Saturday, where I have to make the
exactly.
presentation
Look, Heidi.
one vignette at a time.
Small
If
piece.
we talk about a sentence a day, we also talk about a story a month. So it means
Right.
you could work on a dozen different stories. I don't care, but you got to finish one of them every month.
Got
So
it.
you can split your time and your energy. You can spend all your time researching. You could do this, and you can go off into the class. But you
Yeah.
have to finish a story every month, and you have to write a sentence every day. As
Got it.
long as you keep those are your guardrails. That
Yeah.
because we know that creativity is like a crazed kitten. I mean, it just runs all over the place.
I
A
love the
squirrel.
body rush
It's
that
just
happens when this
it's all over the place.
works.
So you have to let your child self, your creative self, that crazy part of you, um, go wherever it needs to go to do whatever it wants to do. But there has to be one part of you that is staying on track.
Yeah.
One part of you that is staying on track always. And if you do that, if you're doing a story every month, but you're spending 10 years researching a big historical novel, who cares? See, that's how you make certain that your pale self, your the part of you that thinks that you can't be a writer or that you shouldn't be a writer or that it's impossible, that part of you is not controlling your game. If I said to Tananarive, I think your emotions are involved in this. And of course, she snapped my head off when I said, no, it's not. So it's like, I just kind of sat back, it's like, okay, either I'm right or I'm wrong. Either way, I've said my piece, and so eventually she set a schedule for herself. But in the meantime, she was writing scripts and, we were making money, we were doing all this, but you have to have enough control of the chaos that you can stop and try every form of frozen yogurt you want and look at the big plastic dinosaurs, but eventually, if you're driving across country, you want to reach your goal. Okay. And you need to reach your goal by a particular time. And it's a good idea to give yourself enough flexibility that you can take those side trips. It's fun. Or sometimes you're digging deeply into something that's painful and it's not fun. So let me do this little side story over here that's just a silly little something. Or let me read some
True.
comic books. It doesn't matter as long as you get it done. And when you have that part of yourself anchored in, then you can afford to relax and enjoy the journey. Okay, it's
Yeah.
really, really important. Tanari,
Yeah,
Karama has had her
Karama has
hand
a
up.
question. Is it Karama?
Karama.
Karama. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
not like
know
the other
Karama.
Karama.
That's
I know
why.
her too on Twitter, so in Blue Sky.
Yeah.
But we say our names differently. So thank you so much for this. I appreciate so much how you include your family and sort of honor and tribute your family. I tend to do the same thing, like lots of good stories to mine there. And I
Yes.
wonder again, sort of another balance question, how you balance sort of mining those without having it become just like a narrative of the stories of your family, right? And I tend to find myself like writing the story and then thinking, "Fine, this is not for you to just write down the story of what your daddy did and what your mama did. It's in service to the story, but finding that balance sometimes is tricky." I wonder if you have any thoughts on that.
So you mean in your fiction, sometimes you're hewing so closely to what feels like what actually happened. Well, honestly, I mean, is it interesting? Is it compelling? Is it moving? Maybe that's all you need to do, frankly. I mean, I don't think you necessarily need to feel like you have to pull away. I think the time you want to pull away is if real life isn't offering a narrative structure, right?
Mhm.
It isn't offering a beginning, middle, end. It isn't offering a clear theme or message. It's more sort of what do you call it?
A vignette kind of thing.
Yeah, a
Something like
vignette.
that.
And there's a place for vignettes, but what if you're looking for more sort of propulsion, if you're looking for characters who have objectives and there are things standing in their way and what they do to overcome their obstacles, and your real life history isn't following that, that's where the fiction comes in. And it can be tough to fictionalize family, especially if they're still living. I mean, you have to, true story, there was an anecdote that didn't end up in Freedom in the Family that I believed very strongly we needed to include, which was that when my grandmother was young, she had a half brother, that really just a brother, she considered him a brother, who was arrested and on trial for his life. It was a death penalty case. I think a robbery had gone bad. He was among several young men involved as a juvenile, and he ended up executed as a juvenile.
Oh,
And my grandmother never forgave her father for his refusal to go testify as a character witness at his trial. Never forgave him. And my great grandfather was a gentleman farmer. He was a businessman. He was well respected in his community. His word would have gone a long way. And I think what happened was, it's not that he didn't love his son. It's not that he didn't want to speak up for him. He was afraid to. He was afraid of the impact on his business. He was afraid of the impact on his standing in the community. And as a result, my grandmother's brother was put to death. She had, and her respect for men in general. Okay, so you talk about like a boulder that rolls down the mountain intergenerationally, like people have attitudes I don't even know where they came from. And my mother didn't want that story. And I think that spoke to residual shame, as if it's a shameful thing. Like, okay, yeah, it's shameful. Maybe he was keeping the wrong company, he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. But I think it's more shameful that the state of Florida was putting juveniles to death. So imagine my surprise when I heard from the Dozier School, thinking that was the case they were talking about. It was a whole different case. And that kind of juvenile, like institutionalized juvenile death had affected her on her mother's side and her father's side. So I would say I wrote I look, she wouldn't let me put it in a memoir, but I wrote it as a short story called Trial Days, and I fictionalized it. And I just never mentioned that I had written it. I don't think she ever knew. Because in my story, I wanted to give it a better ending. And this may be
yeah.
something you want to do, right? Like I wanted the whole ending of Trial Day has nothing to do with whether that child is found guilty or innocent or whether he's put to death. The ending is that the daughter convinced her father to go testify. That's it. He's on his way to the courthouse at the end of that story. That's the healing part. So I would say, to make it more fun for you, if that's an issue. I mean, sometimes you just want to be truthful and say what happened, and maybe it's closer to memoir. There's nothing wrong with memoir. But if you're fictionalizing it, how can you make it more hopeful? How can you make it more healing? That would be what I would try to do if I were fictionalizing it.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Good.
Another thing, if you're going to do that, then it behooves you to be sure and be absolutely sure that you understand the structures of fiction. And the only way you can do that is by writing them and selling them. If you do that, then you know that you're at that level. Then you can ask questions about, well, how close can I get to memoir while I'm still bending the events and the emotions and the structures to support what fiction is, what that rounding of a story. The natural storyteller can take any incident and just have you rolling on the floor about getting her kids off to school in the morning. But a person who does not understand that can take an incident that was just incredible. My God, it was in the middle of a gas station holdup, and this happened and that happened, and everybody is bored because they're not. See, I used the wrong voice. If it's bored, it's like, yeah, I was. Some guy pulled out a gun, and I was looking at my. Oh yeah, he did take some money from. You have to understand storytelling, and because all of us hear thousands of stories every week, you understand it. All we're going to do here is put you back in touch with what you already know. See, and to that degree, then you can decide, do I want to tell this story about my family, or do I want to choose a specific incident? A story is usually about a moment in which something changed. Okay, so if somebody has, comes downstairs screaming every day, you don't talk about that. You talk about the first time they came down screaming, or the last, or the time that somebody finally fought back. What is that moment? And when you're looking to develop the skill, you probably want to think about, does this story have the 24-hour integrity? It's like, the old Greek plays, often take place within a 24-hour period. So the story, if a story takes place in the period of time it takes somebody to read that story, fantastic. In order to do that, you have to imply so much about your world. Every word has to do triple duty. Every sentence has to not just forward the story, but give background and characterization all at the same time. And that's nothing but practice. That's all that is practice. So the basic structures that we give you to write at least one sentence every day, to write 1 to 4 short stories every month, to rewrite, polish, and submit at least one story every month, to not rewrite stories except to editorial request. Once you've sent it out, move on to the next story. Do not go back and keep rewriting the old one, okay? To read 10 times as much as you write, and to repeat this process 100 times. If you'll stay on that path, you will notice your brain is going to try to go crazy on you. It's going to try, well, I couldn't do this today. Yeah, you could. Why didn't you? I don't write stories. I write novels. Writing is writing. This is a path that will absolutely get you there. If you do something else, try that other thing for a year, and if it doesn't work, come back to this, because what you've just done is you've conned yourself out of success because you were afraid of growth, or you're afraid of freedom, or you're afraid of being judged, or something else. You let fear stop you in some way. Once you've sent it out for publication, don't rewriting. I could spend the rest of my life rewriting a single short story. I could have spent my entire career rewriting a single short story, because the more you write, the finer your discrimination becomes. It's like you're polishing a brass sphere. And every time you polish it, your power of magnification increases. So you will continue to see imperfections in the sphere no matter how long you spend polishing it. At some point, you have to get the joke and let it go. Okay? the idea that you have to read 10 times as much as you write. Everybody understands, I think sort of intuitively, that I'm saying input to increase the quality of your work. What you don't understand is that when you're reading, anytime somebody says, well, where do I send short stories? I automatically know they haven't been reading. Because if they've been reading, you send them to the same places where you saw them. So the reading is market research as well as input. See, these 6 steps, I wish I was smart enough to say that I created them. No, I talked to successful writer after successful writer, and I started noticing what they had in common. And that last thing, repeat this process 100 times. That's to give yourself all the time in the world to get there, to take all the pressure off so that you're not giving yourself so many expectations that you kill your dreams. I literally know people who say, well, it's too tough. I tried, it doesn't work. So I said, well, how many stories did you write? 3. How many of them did you send out? 1. How many times did you send it out? Twice. I was like, what? That's like going to your first karate championship and saying, I'm going to quit because I didn't get grand champion. What are you even talking about? That's not the process of work. What we're doing here, let me just, we never know exactly what we're going to do here. I have a plan. Tenor has a plan. We have a schedule, but then, life gets in the way. So let me put something up on the screen real quick. Okay. And
I might have to unspotlight you for it to show. Let me see. And let me remove Carm.
no, I mean it's okay, sweetie.
Oh, okay.
Okay. I'm gonna pin myself, spotlight myself. All right. What you see in the background there, that's a Zulu. My first solo novel, Street Lethal, the character was clearly described as being as dark and having the facial characteristics of a Zulu. And
Of a
this is
Ken doll?
what they put on the cover. Okay. This was in 1983. And I saw this, my poor editor, Beth Meacham, was shattered, heartbroken that this had happened. I believe her. But the lady who ran the company, she didn't take responsibility for it. She blamed the art department. The art department blamed the marketing department. The marketing department blamed the truck drivers who put the books on the stands at truck stops. No one would take responsibility. So it's very much like the British thing, where if anybody embezzles the mess funds, they hold the entire company responsible. If nobody takes responsibility, then I had to think this is just the way people are, because I wasn't going to say this is what white people do, because that would put me in the position of being the kind of person that I hated, the kind of person who had hurt me. So it's like I have to be non-dualistic. There's something about human nature that makes us try to make the whole world look like we look. It's just something that we do. And I could live with that, but it also suggested something horrific to me. The horrific thing was, if this is just a society I live in, and for 20 years, Octavia Butler and I were the only Black science fiction writers in the world that we knew of. And Chip Delaney had left the field. There was nobody else that we knew of. And I thought to myself, we talked about this a lot. I thought it could take 2 generations for the world to change enough that, that whole thing about you have to work twice as hard to get half as far and so forth. Well, I couldn't work 4 times as hard. And I'm not 4 times as smart. I'm very confident in my intelligence. I'm very confident in my energy level, but I just couldn't get over that barrier until things changed some. I watched people kill themselves trying to do it. They beat themselves to death on that. So my question was, how do I do this? It could take 30 to 40 years. But if I don't engage with this, and I'm betraying the child that I am, and if I do engage with it, how do I not burn myself out? How do I survive? If the meaning of life is to escape suffering, embrace joy, and be of service, and I want to be happy, this is something I want to do so much, I can't push off my happiness for decades. I have to be able to enjoy myself now, every day, so that when the opportunity comes, there is enough of me left to be able to embrace it. Does that make sense? I have this urge to take myself off spotlight. If what I just said makes sense, that we have to find a way to enjoy life while we're doing the things that we need to do to get to our dreams. Give me a thumbs up, give me a heart if you can feel, yes, we have this need. There was this thing that I wanted it more than I can possibly tell you. And if you want to know why I went into neuro-linguistic programming and self-hypnosis and shamanism and martial arts and yoga and all this stuff, it's because I refused to let the world beat me. And I knew that I would get knocked down over and over again. I would be beaten and bloodied and mocked. But somehow I knew that if I could make it through that, that there was a younger version of me. There was a kid right now who's 20 years old or 15 years old, who's looking at me and he's looking at the other fantastic Black science fiction writers and Black artists and saying, if they can do it, I can do it. I had to find the part inside of me that said, even though no one has ever done it, I can do it. This is why I am who I am, and it's why nobody can say anything to me that makes me diminish my belief in myself. Because if I had not found a way to ground my belief in physics, in my sense of the spiritual, that so that no one could tell me no. What Tananarive did, the core of life writing, is to take the real context of your life, what you're actually experiencing, and find ways to put it into your work. That you carry your own cross. You're going to have to carry the load, whatever was given to you by life. It's not that that's fair, it's just the way it is. And you can give it to your audience. What you have to do is you have to filter that through your own kidneys, so to speak, so that what they get is not the poison that you were given, but it's an intoxicating cocktail. They get a fraction of what you had, and you filtered it through your talent, your skill, and your humanity and your philosophy, so that they can be entertained or engaged. It can be difficult to call a piece of really grim storytelling entertainment, but it is. There's a part of us that wants that completion. You have to be strong. It's as simple as that. Like every generation before you had to handle what they handled so you could stand on their shoulders. You are now adults. All of you are adults. And many of you want to create stories that will appeal to children or the child within other adults who are asking, why? Who am I? What is the world? And this story gives you some kind of an idea. That last week we talked about the hero's journey, which is a way of looking at the process of proceeding through life. But what I wanted to talk about today very briefly, and then maybe more next time, because we want to get into analyzing story, because that's where the rubber meets the road in a lot of ways. It was that picture that was, yeah, there it is. Okay, this is the chakras. This is the model of the human beings that we're going to be using more than anything else. It corresponds to Maslow's hierarchy of human needs and Milton Erickson's model of what human beings want in the course of their life. But basically, it's 7 ways that our energies manifest. And if you cut a corpse open, you're not going to find a spinning wheel in there. These are metaphors, not physical reality, unless you happen to believe in some interesting spiritual things. I mean, I'm from California, I understand that. But what it's basically saying is that there are 7 different levels, and these more or less correspond to the levels of growth that we have. If the chakras are going through Muladhara, Svasana, Manipura, Anahata, Vishuddhi, Anja, and Sahasrara, they're going up from the bottom, core survival, sexuality, power, emotion, communication, intellect, and spiritual transcendence. Or what Milton Erickson talked about, that what all human beings want is to master their bodies so that they can explore their environment and learn to satisfy their physical and sexual hungers with integrity, to be able to develop enough power to control their own lives and, put food on their table and a roof over their head, to find love, to bond, to create connections, to perhaps make children and teach them according to their own values, to become valued in their community, to develop a theory of life and a way of looking at things that they can then pass on to the people they care about, to age with dignity and die at peace. That everybody, another way of looking at that, escape suffering, embrace joy, be of service, to master their bodies, their emotions, and their minds. There are ways of looking at this stuff that allow us to boil down the insane complexity of life into some kind of basic things. You know, that any story you write about somebody, they're going to be dealing with a physical challenge, an emotional challenge, or a mental challenge. You know, that it's always going to be at one of those levels. What we talk about in life writing is your body, your heart, your money, and your art. You know, to be able to do these things. Tananarive, in writing about her uncle had challenges to power. All of his power was taken away from him. Challenges to fear, you know, massive fear, trying to understand what's going on. Ultimately, the challenge crushed him. But what she wanted to do was create a situation in which someone could have similar challenges, where it could have a better conclusion. And what she did was she created a universe in which there were spiritual guides, in which there was help from outside the ordinary patterns of what we are as human beings, you know, who could reach down and help this child and help his sister. So she's commenting about the nature of humanity and also the ethical structure of the universe. Really sophisticated work. And I don't doubt why it took her 7 years to do it. You think about all that she had to work through to be able to do that, to be able to create this. We will be going back over these things every time we meet. We're going to talk about your work, your lives, our lives. What I want to do next is get into, unless somebody has a quick question about what I've said, let's get into the stories. Anybody raise their hand real quick. Otherwise, we'll get into stories and we'll have time to go back and visit these things. Let's take Tananarive, back over to you, sweetheart.
So listen, everyone, this isn't very formalized, and we may come up with more formal approaches as we go. In fact, I have no doubt that we will. But I do want to sort of try to adhere to some general principles that I used in the MFA program when we did workshopping. So with the permission of the authors, it would be great to hear each author just say a couple words about where the story came from and maybe what kind of feedback they're looking back for, you know, as we have this session. And then we begin with things that we enjoy and admire about story.
Okay, I will not talk. I will try to avoid talking about things I admired about the story. What I want to know is, according to certain specific structures, the hero's journey and the chakras, what was the story about for you? Where do you identify these elements? Okay, because we're going to go back and forth between the spine of the story and the flesh of the story. And in that way, we're about being holistic writers here.
That sounds like that would be a great portion for the very beginning when the author is speaking, you know, about where their story came from. And then you can ask a question about, if you want, about where they think
see.
Along.
We'll
yeah,
see.
like we said, we're figuring it out as we go. But the first,
each of us has done this individually. We haven't done this a lot
we haven't done this
together, so we have to figure that out.
So literally the first story that came in was The Last Zombies by Leon Sandness. So I'm going to go ahead and sorry to put you on the spot, but you are on the spot now. You need to unmute, please. Just tell us a little bit about where this story came from, and based on the guidance you just heard from Steve, you know, you may have some thoughts about where it falls along the chakras.
So at the time that I wrote this story, I was taking a class at LACC with motion picture production, which included, you know, the whole thing of having a movie and all the business side and the production side of putting a movie together. And so they chose somebody else's story. But I had this one. They liked my writing, but it was a short script, so it wasn't long enough. And so I still like the story. And so I was, at the time, I was living in downtown LA with my then boyfriend, who's now my husband, and we lived in a security apartment building, and it was in a decent part of downtown LA. And we used to go down to this little bar called Beelman's, unrelated to the store, but we used to people watch all the time. I mean, that's our thing. We love people watching, and we would just listen to people's conversations. And so I can't remember exactly what the conversation was, but it kind of seemed like two kind of like uppity kind of girls, and one of them seemed to have kind of like a loser boyfriend. So it kind of all came together. I wanted to write something that I knew about. So of course I knew about the building, and I like describing things and where people are and what they're doing. And at the same time, I was heavily into zombie movies, especially like the Korean versions. Oh, those are so good. And
Train to
also like,
Busan and so forth.
I'm sorry.
Train to Busan and stuff like that.
Yes. Oh my God. And then there was one, I can't think of the name right now, but they were in a school and they got
Yeah,
locked
that
in
was
the
awesome.
school.
Yes.
That was a series.
Yeah, that was yes, that's right. And I've watched The Walking Dead, and I like zombies, but it's like it was too serious for me. It was like, first of all, zombies aren't real, right? But I don't know. I just like I don't know that I like thinking about apocalyptic things, but they just are always in my brain. Like, what's gonna happen if the world's so bad, and what are you gonna do? So I thought
So
I would. I mean, I kind of think sometimes I'm funny. So I just, I like sarcasm. I really do. I appreciate sarcasm. So I'm hoping that showed through in
So
this.
let me ask a couple questions. First of all, I like the process of going from screenplay to fiction to prose. But one of the things, if you do it directly, you write screenplays, in the immediacy. I mean, he walks down the corridor. Okay. In fiction prose, generally speaking, you translate that into he walked down the corridor. Okay.
Mhm.
And what I found is that literally the process of changing it from one tense to another is a way of being sure that you're processing everything that you saw into fiction. That it is actually an advantage to write it one way one time and then to shift it. I've just noticed that. But it is possible to write stories, in present tense. So, that's not a thing. So what I wanted to ask you is just kind of walk through this process in terms of the hero's journey. Who is your lead character? Who's your hero?
Uh, let's see. I guess uh, Claire.
Okay, so
Oh,
Claire, you actually still have some camera direction in there, Zoe
I
capitalized,
know, and
Zoe
I'm so
capitalized.
mad at myself because I like to reread it.
It's
I've
okay. Don't worry
Okay.
about it. This is your process. This is process. I don't care about your stories. I care about your process. Okay. So Claire, what does Claire want?
Claire wants her friend to see that her boyfriend's a loser. And
Okay. So in a very real sense, we could go into that a little more deeply. Why does she want her friend to see this?
mm, well, if I was going to go deep into it, it's because her friend has always just been there for her and looked out for her, and she doesn't want to see her friend getting hurt.
Right. Now, I might say, and I'm not going to lead you, I might say it's because she would feel less lonely. That what she's looking for is that sense of connection. That's what we want with friends. Is that somebody sees things the way, who's on my side, who's walking at my pace. You're chasing after this loser. I'm going to lose you as a friend because I can't respect you. I mean, it's that in that world of things, or I love you and I want you to be happy, or whatever that is. In that sense, then, the zombie apocalypse is a metaphor for life. All good zombie movies are just metaphors. And that Truth is, from just a point of view, we're looking for, what might be a philosophical underpinning to this. It doesn't have to be the one. But so I'm not trying to tell you what your story is about, but in one sense, it's about the fact that the universe is always expanding, and friendships are torn apart. We start developing different senses of ethics and values and life experiences that make us different, and it can get to the point where you can't communicate with the people who used to be your besties. So using the zombie apocalypse as an intensifier for that, it's about two people trying to find friendship in the midst of a world that tears us apart. Then assuming that, then you take a look at the chakras, and it's not about survival because the story starts with them already dead. You see, so it ain't survival. It's power to a degree. They have the power to kill and eat. So that's not really what it is. It's really about the heart. Okay, it's really about the heart space and friendship and growth and love. Sex. It comes in there. The idea of having of zombies having a threesome came up in there. I was laughing my butt off. That I never heard that one before. Communication. You just look at the chakras and you say, what's wrong here? This is someone for whom death and the situation they're in is an intensifier that threatens to destroy the best relationship in her life. So it's about heart. From that point of view, your story is all about heart. Given that, you go back and you take a look at the hero's journey. Her journey is to connect with her friend when life is tearing them apart. The zombie virus, whatever that is, and what's going on with the boyfriend, those are just things that are happening along the path. There'll be a point at which if you are following every step of the hero's journey, which you will never do, the hero's journey is like the
Especially
88
in a short
keys of a
story.
piano. That's
Yeah.
right. You don't play every key on the piano in order, especially. Okay. The challenge is to bond with her friend, to make her peace with being a zombie, to step into through that barrier, but she doesn't want to step through it alone. Okay, we can do this together. The reluctance might be, implicit. I am reluctant to interfere in my friend's life. I'm reluctant to accept this responsibility. I don't know. If I sorted through there, you could probably find something or not. It doesn't necessarily have to be that beat. You don't have to play that up. But there is an acceptance of the challenge, okay? And the acceptance challenge to try to help my friend see. That was where you came to. So obviously that happened. The road of trials is the stuff that happened along the way. Okay, she tries this, this happens. You have to take actions in life in order to find out what the world is so that you can respond to it. That's how you get information. The people who wait forever to act are the people who never get anywhere because they never really learn what the world is. They're too busy trying to work it out in their heads. That doesn't work. What are her powers? The allies are obviously her friend and to a certain degree even the boyfriend. But what are her powers? What are the things that she either has that allow her to solve this, or the characteristics that she needs to develop in order to solve it? Because that's the deeper level. What does she have to learn about herself in order to do this? She either has to learn something new, acquire something new, or find something she already had within her and bring it out. And we've seen, in our own lives, you've seen all three of those things. Sometimes it's a new resource. Sometimes it's a resource we'd forgotten we had. Sometimes it's just trusting a friend. What would you say are her resources?
Wow, I did not think about that. But one of the
Yeah, but you
resources,
did it. You did it. You don't have to think about it. This is automatic. Okay, this is not something that you learn. This is something that you remember. You already know this stuff. So what are her talents? What are her skills? What are her powers?
well, I hope everybody read it, so I'm not spoiling anything.
Don't
But
worry about that. That's up to them.
okay,
That's their problem.
let's see, that mind link communicator that she had
So
to
she's a good
keep communicating.
communicator. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So
The
she,
mind link. The mind link. So,
yes,
and that implies also that she's of very high intelligence.
yeah.
So she both has this tool and she had the intelligence to create the tool. What else does she have?
She's dedicated to her friend.
There you
Um,
go. Loyalty,
she's got loyalty.
strength.
Yeah, and she protected her friend's feelings by, allowing her to have that time, you know,
So she
if
has patience.
just patience. Yeah.
Okay. See, so you look at these things and you ask yourself, this story is a metaphor for the time when my bestie in college, there was a chance that we might break up because I had to tell her some hard things about her boyfriend. And I had the courage and the clarity to put the relationship on the line and say, I love you more than I love our friendship. I want you to be happy and healthy, so I have to tell you. Whatever it is that you do, then you can ask yourself, well, if I'm writing this story to a younger version of myself, and first of all, you write the story the first time just for the fun of it. You don't think about this stuff during your first draft. So you look back and say, well, what is it I'm trying to communicate to that younger person or that potential reader? What do I want that reader to feel when they stop? And you heighten those things or you clarify them in your mind. Am I doing this? Yeah, this is the path. This is what would get them through that. What is the greatest moment of potential loss? What is the dark night of the soul? What is the greatest defeat in your story? There's always a
They might have
lowest point.
started with the greatest defeat. And by the way, Leon, you don't need to answer all these questions now. In
Uh,
fact, it wouldn't even be possible
okay.
to answer all these questions now. I do want to open it up a bit, honey, to talking about the things that work for in the story and hearing from the rest of the group about the things that work in the story for them and then focusing next on questions and suggestions for how to improve the story, which is how I usually approach workshopping. If that's okay, since we have two stories and we're running up on the 30-minute mark here. So is that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that what we're trying to do is to give you guys frameworks for analyzing and judging each other's stories because we don't have time to read all the stories you're going to be writing, and you are going to be writing, right? But you guys should be finding partners and little cliques of people to read each other's stories. So you listen to what Tananarive says. What are the 5 most important things that Tananarive said today? With me, it's like you think about you walk them through the hero's journey, and you look at where are they damaged in terms of the chakras. What is it that they don't have that they need to achieve? Okay, so take it away, T.
So I'm going to remove the spotlights so just as people speak, they show up on the screen. Of course, Steve has already mentioned one of the things that probably stood out to a lot of us that we enjoy about this story is its use of humor. I too was chuckling aloud at the notion of a three-way between zombies. This I thought was a very approach and a less depressing approach to a zombie story. And I was very intrigued by the science fiction element of the telepathy. In fact, that's something that I think that you can even bring out more as you look at how to revise the story.
Oh,
And
by the way, we have to interject a little bit from time to time because I had a note on something that you said earlier that I think is important. It was about the photograph, and that's not as important in science fiction or fantasy. And what I wanted to offer is the thought that if you can find a photograph that relates to any aspect of your story, because in a fantasy world, you still have farmers, you still have business people. Okay. And in a science fiction world, you still have people living ordinary lives. If you could have a photo that relates to any of that, your depth of clarity about the lives of the people in that photograph then give you a standard. That's how well you have to understand your fantasy world. That's how well you have to understand your science fiction world. You don't say everything that you know, but you have to give that same imitation of reality. I'll shut
so
up. Go ahead,
we're
T.
not going to go person by person because we don't have time to have like everybody like sound off on every element. But if you feel very strongly about something about this story that worked for you that you want to be sure Leon hears you say right now, jump in. Since you read the story, what was something that you enjoyed about it? And in doing that, by the way, this will also help you think about how to incorporate these kinds of elements in your own work. Benta Dixon has her hand up.
Hi, Leon. Hi, y'all. I really love the pacing of this story. It felt like I was in it with you in terms of like how things progressed. So along with it just being really funny, I felt like it had a really good pace to it. One thing that I would love to know more about is like whether it's through flashbacks or something else, more of a background of maybe the three of them. Like, how did she first learn that this dude was a loser? Like, how did Claire first learn that this dude was a loser? Like, did it ever interfere with their relationship before this one time when they left him in the dust? And I also love the physical descriptions of like what's happening to them as they're becoming zombies. Just, I really enjoyed it. Thanks.
Great, thank you for that. Jordan is
Thank
also
you.
chiming in chat that Jordan also enjoyed the pacing. Anybody else want to jump? Oh, let me remove your spot. Jump in with something they admired about this story. And silence doesn't mean they didn't admire it. It just means praise it. Where are you? I saw a hand up. Roz.
Yes. So I enjoyed the vivid imagery also. And I really like the carrier charging after the apocalypse. That line was
Oh
hilarious.
yeah, that was a good line. That was a good line.
But my only question was, why was she still checking her bank account? If I'm turning into a zombie, I don't think I'm going to still be checking my account. But I thought that was hilarious. But yeah, I also like the pacing of the story, and I really wanted to know again how long they had been friends. I don't remember if that was there, but also, what was it that made them bond so closely as friends? I thought that might give some insight into it. I know it's hard to do with a short story, but I enjoyed reading it.
Thank you, Roz. That's
Thank you.
awesome. And Otis, you also have your hand up.
Yeah, I liked I don't know, the energy of it. It felt kind of like a fever dream. Like, and it just kind of like ran headlong, and I like that. And I hope whatever form it's in that it has some of that energy. And I like the world building around Mine Lake, and would actually like to see a little more about that, and what happened in the transition between, them trying out Mine Lake and installing it, and people becoming zombies, because I think there's a lot of stuff that can be explored there.
This is
Otis, a
Yeah.
well done short story will give you that sense that the world extends beyond where the light is. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And part of the art of being a short story writer, or being a writer of any kind, is to know what to leave in and what to leave out. But you definitely
Mm-hmm.
want to have the imitation of a full world.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, which leaves those kinds of questions. You can answer more of those questions in a novel, but even with a novel, the writer should know twice as much as they put in that novel. And then they should choose the details that the
Mm-hmm.
reader needs, while implying things that you don't answer, so that the reader it's the imitation of there being a bigger world.
Mm-hmm.
You can't really possibly create a complete world. But for the reader, an author must have authority within their world.
Mm-hmm.
They must need to know their world like God knows this one, to a degree. So that thought that you'd like to know more about that link says that she did her job right.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
Jaime, you have your hand up as well.
Yeah, I agree with the things I've already heard, but I also, in my enjoyment of the humor, I really wanted at the very end of the story it even more obvious that the dead boyfriend that was being saved for food was a complete jerk, and the arc of how his girlfriend came around to realizing he was a jerk, and then the two girls conspiring to lead him onto that three-way where he thought he was going to get some and they were going to eat him. I wanted it more obvious as a punch joke. Um, also, I just saw somebody in the chat write, was the mind link technology the cause of the apocalypse? The idea of zombies able to have erudite conversation with each other was great. And I wanted even a little bit more of their philosophizing in some academic language, highlighting that their
See, if
bodies
you were
are
going to
like
do that,
this while their minds are still intact.
see, Jaime, if you were going to do that, then you'd have to imply that the mind link was a very common phenomenon, that it had been put into millions of people before things went wrong. Because it couldn't be, I put this into you and you turn into a zombie. I'm never going to put it into a second person. On the other hand, if this became a common thing, and then something went wrong, some undocumented feature or somebody, a virus or something like that, a computer virus, so that all this, these linked people suddenly become zombies. I could write that story. And so, that's so could Leon. That
It's a
she could.
direction. It's up to her whether
That's
they,
right.
what
It's a
the
direction.
they
Yeah,
want to
so
go
I
into.
hope that she can see that we can take any one of these points, and there are 1,000 different directions you can go in. You have to drive it, though. We know a writer of supreme talent who, because of his drug use, lost the ability to differentiate between which ideas were the best to use. So at every story juncture, he could see 100 options and he could not decide. If an editor told him what to write, he could do it and he could do it perfectly, but he could no longer make that decision. So part of what we're strengthening is your confidence that you've always got more ideas and your ability to choose between them to create a particular story within a particular story world that you've created.
So, Leon, I just want to jump in here and let you know that I think a lot of these comments and questions can be answered in point of view and characterization through that funnel. I was actually, well, one thing didn't surprise me when you mentioned that you had adapted this from a script. I was not surprised because it is very cinematic and it's like, I see that. But one of the things that happens in scripts is that we don't get a lot of interiority necessarily, which is the character's inner thoughts, workings, emotions to the point where I didn't realize that Claire was the protagonist. So that's one thing you want to look at from the very first lines of the story is how can you hew more closely to Claire's perceptions, not just the external, like the cinematic camera eye, but from behind Claire's eyes, what are the protagonist's perceptions? And that will lead you naturally to moments of, oh, this is a good moment for backstory. Like Claire is seeing Zoe, and like this reminds Claire of how Zoe was a couple years ago, or whatever it is. Like when the boyfriend first comes up, this is a good place to have a flashback. Not even a whole flashback, but just her thinking about what she never liked about this boyfriend from the very beginning. And now that he's dead, it's even, you see what I mean? I mean, I think if you go down the filter of point of view and characterization, you'll find that you're answering a lot of these concerns and questions, and your next draft will be a lot more literary and a little less cinematic.
One thing I wanted to say before we move on to the next story is that Harlan Ellison's story, A Boy and His Dog, ends, or the movie, I forget whether or not the original story ends exactly the same way. It's been so long since I read it. But the movie ends at one point, and then it has an afterword that changes the meaning of everything you thought you were seeing before it. So if you wanted to make people thinking that this is, zombies having three-way sex and enjoying the apocalypse, you could go there and then, asterisk, 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 and afterwards the two girls are picking their teeth, saying, "Well, let's let's watch a movie," or something like this. That you can save that to later, and be sure you enjoy your first draft. That Ray Bradbury, you write your first draft as if you're running barefoot through the grass. Just have fun with it. Afterwards, you look and say, what have I done here? How can I strengthen it? So all these things we're talking about, this is all true and it's all editing, but your first draft should just be pure pleasure. Just have fun.
And one last thing I want to say about the ending, just on point of view, is that typically, not always, but typically, the ending of a story is in the point of view of your main character. And you've shifted your ending to Rick, which is funny and it's true. I'm already dead, right? But in some ways, that sentiment could be held by any of the characters, really, you know. So think about that. Like, how am I using Claire and how am I using point of view as a North Star through this whole story to reveal
Yeah,
in your next?
and if you ask yourself these kinds of questions and continue to read, I mean, read ferociously, you'll start picking stuff up. You'll start picking all of this. The key to all of this is you do the reading and the writing, and that's what integrates it at the level of simplicity so that everything we're talking about is unconscious competence and you're just having fun. That's what you do. You handle the complexity until it gets simple. Then you add a little bit more complexity until it gets simple. Then you add, so right now it's just the simple thing. Enjoy the process. You're on the path.
Thank you for
Okay.
sharing that. I'm sorry we're rushing but we do have 2 stories. We'll typically do 2 stories per session. And the next story is by Carl Anthony Pierre. So surprise, surprise, you're about to be spotlighted. And so let us know a little bit about where this story came from. And you saw the drill. We'll do something similar that we did the first time in terms of Steve talking you through his process.
All right, thank you. Hello, everyone. So I wrote this in January. A friend of mine said, "Hey, this magazine, they're seeking out fantastical horror and supernatural horror stories, and we should try to do something." So my friend, he wrote a story, I wrote a story, and hence the story that maybe some of you have read. And basically, not consciously, though it's there because I think we're all thieves and we're all like, whatever we read and watch, we're all thieves. And it's
Yes.
basically the premise of, I guess, the first 2 Predator movies, or even From Dusk Till Dawn, is that you have these tough guys who are really badasses. And then they run into something that is a lot more badass than they are. And how do they deal? You know? And that's one part of it. The other part of it is the voodoo, actual voodoo, not dolls with pins and all that other garbage, but the loi, which is connected to the orisha of West Africa. So the main character, he doesn't believe in that stuff. And he has this aunt who believes, and he's like, yeah, sure, auntie. Yeah, whatever, auntie, right? And then he's confronted with that evil, and he learns that maybe some of what his auntie said wasn't such BS after all. And hence, he gains the supernatural strength to deal with the supernatural threat. And then it's like, open up a can of whoop ass, and that's
Oh,
pretty much it. That was it. Very
okay, first of all,
straightforward. Yes.
you ain't stealing nothing. The hero's journey is about a moment at which there was a challenge that was great enough to force a person to rise to the next level. They have to go through the dark night of the soul, which means they have to empty themselves out. So in any story of a hero, it only works if the hero feels like they're going to lose. And the audience is thinking, oh my God, how does Arnold beat the Predator? The Predator is tougher. How is that? So you're you're talking about this is you wanted to stand on one of the threads of primal storytelling, which is you have a great hero who this is a moment of growth. He develops faith. Okay, he develops faith in the orishas, faith in voodoo or voodoo, whatever. So in essence, if you were to take a look at the chakras, then you have a story that will threaten his life as a means of opening his heart to the nature of spirit. Because the answer was not an intellectual answer. He didn't pick a lock. He didn't solve an equation. He kicked somebody's ass because he had the ancestors working through him. So what stopped the ancestors from coming through before? Was it lack of faith? What was it that stopped him from accessing that force? Because whatever it was that stopped him, that's what your story is about. the moment at which he's forced to overcome a blockage in order to become more of what he is. So let's kind of go through this. Who's your lead character?
My lead character is Maximilien Lothaire Rochenoir. He's a big guy because I'm a big guy. He's of Haitian descent because I'm of Haitian descent. And I, people who know me and read my story, they saw glimpses of me in Max, like people telling him, "Oh wow, you're tall. How tall are you?" and all that stuff. I just put that stuff in. And
And by the way, as you keep reading 10 stories for every story you write, you're going to want to indent your stories, in a way that you did not hear, because you want it to, especially at the beginning of your career, you want your stories to look like what the editor expects it to look like, so that doesn't stop them and they start thinking, something other than just drop into the story. Okay.
Yeah, that's just something for both of you, actually. A lot of published stories are not written in traditional formatting for short stories. So reading published stories might not teach you, but I can put up a sample story that I use in my Black horror class that is the traditional formatting, indented paragraphs, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay.
So if we know that at the end of the story, this character evolves to the next level of spiritual awareness, that in many ways, this might be the origin story of a great hero. Okay, you're telling an origin story. This is probably something that you're doing because you wished you'd had heroes like that when you were younger. That you're writing it'd be very easy to think that you're writing a story that is really for a younger version of you. Okay, and that's great. That is one of the most honest things you can possibly do. It's one of the most direct accesses to your creativity. So I total agreement with that. What does he need in order to step into his power? Tell me.
Well, the story starts off as enough.
Okay, I don't need you to tell me the story.
No. But he starts. It does start as a typical police thing. He shows up at the scene of a crime, and then he investigates the crime, and then something happens, and then he's confronted with a supernatural threat, and he thinks he's going insane because he's in denial of what he's seen. And there's basically a 9-foot demon monologuing. He's like, "I'm losing my mind," right? And then it's when he realizes that maybe his aunt was telling the truth about the spirit world, and also remembering, well, maybe I'm going nuts, but I'm still a cop, and this guy's still a murderer. So he believes in justice, and then he joins that with his the faith of the ancestors, and he physically breaks the chains, and then he does what he has to do, which is stop this bad guy.
Here's what I'm going to tell you.
Yes.
You went through, basically, you had to go through the whole story to try to kind of figure this out. That is natural. What we're going to want 10 stories from now, if I ask you that question, you won't go through the whole story. You'll go directly to it, because you'll know what it is I'm looking for. In the hero's journey, the hero confronts a challenge that overwhelms him. Nothing he has will satisfy the needs. That is what throws you into the dark night of the soul. And that is the point that is very similar to going to the gym and lifting weights until you reach muscle failure. And if you reach muscle failure, your hindbrain says, squirt some more strength juice into those muscles. We'll take some resources from here, put them over here. So you eat, you rest, you go back to the gym the next day, and you can lift another 5 pounds. Okay. So he's hanging upside down or whatever it is, and the monster is going to kill him. And the monster is monologuing, and so forth and so on. The way through the dark night of the soul is called the leap of faith. And the leap of faith is always faith in one of 3 things: faith in himself, faith in his companions, or faith in a higher power. You touched on all 3. He trusted his aunt, his companion, that her perception is accurate about the nature of spirit. Okay, so he's trusting a higher power, and he trusts that he, as a human fuse, can handle this energy, and also that he's not going crazy, that what he's experiencing is real. So he trusts himself, he trusts his companion, he trusts higher power. That's actually very sophisticated. I mean, it really is. I mean, you touch on that. That's why I say once again, don't ever try to do that. Not in your first draft. Just write your first draft and then go back and say, what have I got here? And then by understanding the chakras, that you're getting this character to the point where they can accept their power, and part of their power is spiritual. So therefore they have to go through their breaks. So I'm going to go back to the thing that you never directly answered. What stopped him from having access? Everything you talked about is stuff he already had within him. He did not need something from the outside. So something has stopped him from believing in himself. Something stopped him from believing in his companions, his aunt, and something stopped him from believing in God or the spirit or the universe or the Orishas, okay? Bringing the Loas down. What stopped him? Because your story is about the removal of the obstacle. That everything else exists to force him into a position where he cannot play small. If he does, he will die. He will not only die, he will betray his task to be a warrior for his community. So his very identity demands that he put aside whatever it was that he used to keep his brakes on. What was it that kept his brakes on?
Well, for lack of a more elegant way to phrase it, I suppose it's the idea that the world is what I see and what I smell and what I touch, and that people can believe whatever they want to believe.
His
I
ego.
don't. So
His ego stopped him. He felt like he'd mastered this chunk of the world, and the resources he needs are outside his conceptualization of it. So this event was a moment in which his ego shell cracked. Perfect. Plays like a baby, works like a charm. I'm going to shut up for a second. T.
No, I'm just I'm good. I mean, my approach is like more, yeah, okay, well, I'll start mine then. Is that what you're saying? Is the things that I think are really working in this story.
Absolutely.
And I want to hear more. And I like the way it was structured last time, that we say things that are really working, and then we follow up with questions or suggestions. That gets through it pretty quickly. So one thing I will note is that your story really came to life during those action scenes. And I feel like that's where you are living kind of emotionally, that's where you wanted to get to. And it really shows because they're very detailed. I could see it happening. And as we've discussed, it had the emotional underpinning because we've seen his journey to get to that point where he could access his inner strength. That combination of his aunt and the charm and like, oh yeah, I'm a cop.
But before we go on, I wanted to ask him, who is your favorite action writer?
uh my favorite action, like a novelist, you mean more like
Fiction
prose?
writer. Prose.
uh,
Who writes
uh,
the kind of action that gets your blood going?
um it's not wall to wall pure action. I like the Spencer novels.
Oh, they're
uh,
wonderful.
I like the Spencer novels because there's a lot of, Spencer doesn't lose a lot of fights. Neither does
Yeah.
Hawk.
Okay,
I
so
like
so
it.
here's the whole thing. Hogg didn't lose any. So with Spencer, this ties right into what I was going to say. That Robert Parker never had Spencer do anything he himself could not do. For the first 20 years that he was writing them, he was very physical man. Wrote a book on weightlifting. Um, one writer who is Another writer who's at the top of that. When the action is there, you believe it. Mickey Spillane. Spillane understood that kind of wounded, larger than life hero. But in some ways, the best of all of them was Robert E. Howard, the creator of Conan. For God's sake, go over. You can get the complete Robert E. Howard for $5 on Kindle. Read that stuff. You want to talk about somebody who knew how to create a world in which superhuman beings collided with each other, bruising each other up. But there was a sense of poetics. You could feel he believed this. Watch the movie The Whole Wide World, in which Vincent D'Onofrio and Renee Zellweger, actually, it's a biography of Robert E. Howard. And gives you some sense of how the psychology of the man connects to the images he creates. So this is good stuff. There is a need for what it is that you want to do. I love what it is that you're trying to do. And as you know, I've
So
done a lot of what it is that you're trying to do. So
yeah, I was
let's
going to
open
say,
it up, team.
wait. I want one last thing, and then I'm going to open it up. I don't want to keep people over. One of the other great things that pops out in the story is your use of dialogue. Your dialogue is funny, it's very natural, but it also opens up a yearning for me to see more balance with the exposition. I often could not see where I was. And I'm going to send both of the writers links with like notes that I have like within the manuscripts themselves, just little hints, places where, you know what, give me one detail about this new person who just walked in. Give me one detail so I can see this room, again, filtered through point of view. And the example I give is if they're at the police station, if you're giving a detail about the police station, maybe it's very gray in the police station because they keep the shades down for whatever reason, and your character feels some kind of way about it. Or maybe there's a lot of light and he feels some kind of way about that. So find a way not just to add details, but add details that have resonance with the point of view character who is conveying those details. And with that, I am going to open it up. I'm going to get rid of all of our spotlights so that people can raise their hands and also share things that they enjoyed about the story and questions or suggestions for making it even better. You've been very lively in chat. Who was it who was talking about the Haitian cultural and spiritual elements? Does someone want to elaborate on that?
People are so shy.
I know, but it's okay. It's our first one. I thought maybe someone was looking for.
Yeah.
Oh, okay,
Otis,
Otis, jump
Yeah,
on.
I really liked it, and I liked the Haitian spiritual elements.
It
And
me it means a lot to me that you liked it. It means a
thank
lot.
you, thank you. Yeah. No,
so are
actually, I
you
really
guys are you guys going to pair up? Are you guys going to pair up and trade stories? Because
probably I could see
finding
that.
writing partners it could be one of the greatest values of a writing class like this. I
Right,
kid you not.
right. Yeah, I could see that happening. Yeah, because I mean, yeah, but I thought it was dope. Like, I mean, I like the spiritual elements. I mean, it's exactly the kind of thing that I'm into and the kind of thing that I write. And I like that it was like I liked exactly how like deadpan cop shit that was. Like it felt like I was watching Law and Order or something. Like it was just like straight hard boiled, and I don't know, I really dug it.
I think he
Maybe
should do more stories about that character, a supernatural cop, in that sense. And you should be reading Joseph Wambaugh and other cop, stuff so you really, really dive into that. If you're going to do that,
I've read some Ed McBain,
yeah,
87th
yeah, yeah, he
District.
does. Yes, absolutely,
I've
great.
read a lot of Ed McBain a few years
Okay,
ago, and
And I don't
so
know if
let's see.
you know any artists, but I was seeing a comic, I just did a comic called Moondogs. I'm delving a little bit more into comics, and it really did
I
say,
read that and I enjoyed it. I wanted to tell you.
Yeah, so publish your short stories to establish your IP, and then see if you can get some comics going. Avalon Jacka.
Thanks,
Hello.
thanks, Mr.
hey,
Grindhouse.
I just wanted to say I also really loved the cultural aspects. It made me want more. Like you hint on it, and that little additional detail, like Tana Nareed was saying, like I wanted to know more because I'm outside of the culture, so just that little bit extra of digging into those descriptions, I think would really drive it forward because he's just such a cool character. He's kind, but he can be tough when he needs to be, and I just want to learn more about him through that lens and how he's looking at the world.
that's
Well,
great, Avalon,
thank
and
you.
thank you for that.
I wrote two more stories since I wrote a story focusing on his aunt, and I remembered because between the time I wrote it and then there was January 25th, Afrofuturism, and Tananarive spoke of the oh shit moment. I'm sorry, I say your name in the French way.
I
It's,
like it. I like it.
Tananarive. I'm a native French speaker, so it makes sense to me. So
Okay,
the oh shit.
I've got to say something, Finn.
Yes, sorry.
One thing that a writer has to sell is specialized knowledge. Lean into your culture. Lean into you heard Avalon. You're outside. She's outside that culture, and if you create a good story, she will hunger to know more about this, and that is a value on top of your skill as a writer. Lean into it.
That scene at the aunt's house is the perfect opportunity to just, again, give us more details and the setting that are specifically cultural. That the meal sounded delicious. It made me hungry, but I wanted more. I wanted more, specifically in that scene.
I wrote. I had a word limit, but I wrote another story that is around the aunt, where she's the protagonist. And I remembered something you said, Tananarive, about the oh shit moment. That the aunt, in my mind, I modeled after Angela Bassett and her boyfriend, who is from Benin, which I modeled after Jimun Hunsu. They're cooking dinner. And she's like, oh shit, I forgot to get something. And then she goes to the store and something happens on the way to the store. So I used some of that for.
So in other words, what you could do is you could think that what you're doing is you're writing about a very special family, that has adventures and is different in the world. Let's move on to our to Rose Carter.
Roz
Carter.
Yes. Okay. So one thing that I really enjoyed was at the very beginning of the story where he's drinking hot chocolate. And I like that touch because it wasn't coffee, which is stereotypical, but because it also had a nice juxtaposition to this big guy liking this small, sweet treat, right? So I really enjoyed that.
That's me. That's me. I don't drink coffee. I like hot cocoa.
So I also thought that the pacing was really tight. It kept my attention, and I think that your dialogue really was the driver for that. It was those small details, talking about the small chain in that scene with the aunt that I enjoyed. I wanted a little bit more of that. Where I had a little bit of difficulty was I don't know what point of view the story was written in. It felt like in some parts it was in first, first. In some parts it might have been in third. So that gave me a bit of confusion. But overall, I enjoyed reading the story, and I would definitely read other stories with this protagonist.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. And I just want to reiterate, Carl, that the comments you've heard here from people suggest that whether your story is ready for publication is a completely different subject than the fact you have found a vein of gold. You could continue to dig in this vein and tell stories about this character and build out that world while you're working on your skills. And I think that you could sell them. You could sell some of these stories. How far away you are from being able to do that, I don't know. I'll need to take a look at some more of your stuff. But what's very clear is that you have a storyteller's instinct. So let's just finish getting you the storyteller skills that you need. This is good. This is a good start for what it is that we're doing today. And did you have any final comments, questions, or requests before we move on to conclusion?
Me or just everybody?
You.
Well, thanks. I mean, it's always like, that kid who does a drawing is like, look what I did. And he just hopes it's all positive reinforcement. That's kind of how I felt. So
no,
I'm
it's
glad.
not going to be all positive reinforcement. What it's going to be is honest assessment from a positive point of view.
Yes.
But we will also tell you the work that you need to do so that we're not going to bullshit you. We want you to actually be a pro. And you're not one of the people I'm going to kind of encourage to drop out. I would encourage you to stay in because you've got the passion and you've got the mind for it. All you need is a little information and just keep working. Keep working. That's great.
I didn't have, I tried to clean it up as much as I could before sending it. I had like a short deadline. But yes, I definitely know I have things to work on, plot holes, leaps in logic, things like that.
Absolutely. But make sure
I had a lot of fun, right? And there's a little Aubrey and Max. I mean,
yeah, that's fine. There's a little Aubrey in all of us. What you need to do is polish that up. You've got till the end of the month to polish that to the point where you send it out. And if you get rejections, man up. Simple as that. You're on a process. You're going to get this.
This story was sent and was rejected, but I'm still waiting for the editorial comments. I haven't had those.
So then
yet.
you need.
Sometimes you don't get them. Sometimes people don't get them.
I don't know they promised them, so I'm just.
So here's what you do. That was your story for this month. Be sure you have another story for next month. Okay, a new story, at least one every month. A sentence a day, a story a month. We're going to have our next meetings. Take this note. Our meetings in April will be on the 12th and the 26th. The 12th and the 26th.
Yeah, there's an extra week in there because of travel. We will tell you which stories we'll be workshopping as soon as we can. You'll have a little more notice this time because we're a little farther out. We've had several submissions, so there are already 2 in the queue, probably more than 2. There's probably 4 in the queue already, but also go ahead and send your stories to us. We may get to a point where we reconfigure the way we use our time so that we can get to more stories. We'll see. We'll see, depending on how things go. But yeah, please do look for that link to Life Writing on Circle. Not even as many of you who are here today are also on Circle yet. And that is our class page. That is where we put the videos up. That is where I'm going to put up my lecture I did at Cambridge. That's where basically I want you to interact with each other. It's a private site just for this group. And the link is in the chat. In fact, I could do it again. I'm going to do it right now. It's a private link. Do not send it to your friends. This is a private link.
The Life Writing Circle is for everybody. But the Life Writing Professional site that is a segment of that is just for you guys. It's a private place for you to share and talk and ask any questions you have. Draw our attention to it, and we will answer anything that you have. Any questions that came up today that you didn't have a chance for, we can dive as deep as you want to.
Oh yeah, you don't have to wait.
And I are in there every day.
Every day. So don't wait until workshop days to feel like you can't talk to us. We're always on Circle. So if you can't find the link or what are the stories, all that information is on the site at Life Writing on Circle. So
all right.
Can I ask a very quick question?
Yeah, real quick.
Real quick.
The stories that we submit, they don't have to strictly be sci-fi, or they can be horror and everything else as well.
Oh yeah, no.
You wanted sci-fi.
Yeah,
not
horror
necessarily.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, horror or science fiction are going to be where we're going to dive deep. But the truth is that when I'm teaching science fiction people, I have them write non-science fiction stories. The first thing I want to find out is, can you write a story? Do you know what a damn story is? Now we extrapolate. Now we bring in the demons and the spaceships. But if you want to do slice of life, fine by me. If you want to do science fiction or horror, fine by me. You want to do fantasy, detective, whatever you want. You went through a particular door to get in here. But all this stuff connects, and eventually we're going to have people with lots of different interests in here. If this is good for you guys, if you like it, be sure to tell your friends there's something special going on here.
We have a last question from Zeke, I believe.
Okay. Let's take it real quick.
This was great. Once again, a great class. So quick question. I'm looking at the Life Writer Professional, and I'm trying to find the area where to send a story to you.
Oh, stories should be emailed to Life Writing Courses. I should put that up there. Thank you for asking, at gmail.com.
Or if you wanted to, you could attach them in the Life Writing Professional area and call our attention to them.
But it's best to do it through the email because then I'm starring them and I'm keeping track of how many we have there.
Not a problem. This will work because I have a story that is more like magical realism.
Yeah, great.
The magic.
Great. I love your T-shirt.
Oh, thank you. It's
the big boy.
Godzilla and the Kanagawa wave. So Godzilla,
There you go.
cause of the Kanagawa wave. If you know that famous Japanese painting. Sorry.
So Tananarive,
So
why
I'm
don't you
getting
take us
a
out?
message from Karama that she's getting a message that she needs to be invited
That's
to
what
the.
it told me on
I
my
thought
thing.
that link was an invitation link, which is what I'm confused about. But I'm gonna go. Are you already on Circle?
I am.
Okay, then I'm gonna just invite you. I guess that's what I'll do. I'll
We'll
find
work
you.
it out.
All right.
All right, people. Any questions you have, be sure to let us know. This is for you. And we want to know, what do we need to keep you on that path so that every week, every story you write, you can feel yourself getting just a little bit better, just 1% better. You do that, you'll get there. You will all get there. Everybody who can stay on the path can get there. And we believe in you. And I want to thank you very much. I love so much talking writing. I hope you can tell this is my jam. This is my happy place, is being with people like you doing things like this. Only thing I like even close to as much as getting hit in the face by friends. Good
Is there
shot. Ow.
anybody else here who needs to be added to, while I'm doing, if you're on Circle, but you are not a part of the Life Writing Professional page, which is a locked private page, let me know and I will add you now while I'm thinking about it. If not, just email me or message me on Circle. And
aside from that, we'll see you on the 12th.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Take care. You can unmute yourselves. Everybody say bye to everybody. Unmute yourselves.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
all.
All right. There you go.
What a great day.
Yeah.
Good work by the submitters. Good work by
Yes, thank you,
Thank
everybody
you.
who submitted.
Yes, thank you
Thank
for
you.
Thank you
submitting.
very much. I
Yeah,
appreciate
thanks for
that.
doing that.
Great.
Thank
Bye-bye,
you.
everybody.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you,
I'm
everyone.
excited.
Take care.
I don't think I'm on Circle, but I'll find out.